Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Aircraft Broker Academy podcast. Our guest today is Noelle Pearson. She comes from Monach Air Group. She is a charter broker trainer. And I thought it would be a great idea to bring her here to the podcast so she can tell us how the industry works and how you can get into charter broker sales. Noelle, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So we're going to get right into it. And my opening question to you is, how did you get into charter sales?
So a lot of people will get into charter sales, maybe through applying through jobs, things like that. I got in through applying through jobs, but my situation was slightly different. I was furloughed early in COVID. I was working in black car transportation, and I reached out to the CEO because I saw a job on LinkedIn, and I said, "Hey, saw you have this job open, hire me." And I was hired May 1st, 2020. Just like that.
Hire me.
No, it was a little bit more in detail from that, but had a few interviews, walked through my background in business travel, and a lot of similarities overlapped as far as working with executive assistants, directors of events, things like that in the ground transportation side of things. And they just saw so much potential with me.
Look at that.
They hired me.
Very good. So when you got into it, did you have like any aviation background?
I had no aviation background. I mean, I love to travel and have always loved aircraft. My grandpa used to take me to aviation days at the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. Northwest would host them. You'd actually walk through all the different aircraft out there. But no background at all. So I had about 6 weeks off between the time that I was furloughed and the time that I started the job as a charter broker. And so I did a lot of research on aircraft and what types of aircraft were out there and the different light, mid, super mid, heavy, all that.
So when you started with Monarch, did they give you any sort of training in the beginning?
Yeah, so I started with private jet services.
Okay.
Back in 2020, and I did 2 stints there. So I did a stint where I was a charter broker, and then I came back after about a year and a half away at a different 121 charter company.
Okay.
And was a leader when I came back. But my training when I first started at private jet services was mostly what is a broker? What is an operator? How much runway length do you need to land a jet?
Sure.
And not a lot of, hey, this is how we talk to clients or anything like that. Most of the technical things, in the CRM.
Gotcha.
Things like that.
Gotcha. What would you say that were some of the challenges you faced when you started as a charter broker?
I think the biggest challenge is figuring out what aircraft can do the trip for your client nonstop with a fuel stop, and then what actually does your client want if they've flown they've flown privately before, or if they're new to chartering. It's really on you as a charter broker to guide them and not choose a dud of an aircraft, if you will, that maybe has a poor interior. So choosing the right aircraft, I would say, is the hardest.
Okay. And how do you go about choosing the right aircraft for the client?
Yeah. So a lot of charter brokers, I would say almost all of them. I have yet to meet one that doesn't use Avinode. It's a great software tool that connects operators and brokers. It's kind of like an online marketplace. I always joke that it's like the scalpers, the haves and the have what you need versus have. And so you go in and you put your trip that your client wants on there. And you say, this is my minimum aircraft category. Maybe it's a turboprop or something. How many passengers, dates, all the jazz. And it lists out operators that are willing and possibly available to do the trip and the price.
Gotcha. So like most of the clients that you interact with, do you feel like they have the knowledge about what aircraft to use, or you kind of like have to like educate them on how the whole thing works? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really depends on the client and their knowledge of private aviation. Some people have been traveling private for years. They've maybe been traveling cross country. Maybe they've even owned an aircraft before. With those ones, they know what they want. And we're maybe saying, hey, do you have any aircraft preferences? And they say, yes, I want the Challenger 604, or I want the Falcon 7X. But other times you might be working with an executive assistant or maybe a director of events for a larger group event, and they are maybe in their first time. And unless if their boss has said, hey, we want this particular one, we're kind of guiding them on what might be best for that trip. If it's going to be nonstop, maybe it's a turboprop, maybe it's a light, depends on where they're going.
Gotcha. So here's another question for you. At the Aircraft Broker Academy, I teach people how to sell the airplane.
Yeah.
Not the flights, but the entire airplane, right? And how the whole course is structured is I teach them how to start their own business instead of working for a brokerage. I mean, I guess they could use that information and apply it and work for someone else. But what is your advice, for the viewers? Someone is looking to become a charter broker. Do you recommend them to work for someone from the get-go or starting their own thing?
I would say I think working for someone is best, especially when you're first starting out. You have the support where a lot of times there will be a base salary. Some places you don't, you just have a 1099. But my advice is work for somebody who is a known charter broker in the industry that can help get you that knowledge of aircraft and Avinode sourcing. And then you can kind of build up your client book. You might not be able to take that client book out on your own because there are non-solicitations, but at least you then have that knowledge and you can either apply it at another charter broker or somewhere else in the aviation industry.
Yeah, and I guess you could also start your own thing right after.
And
because I've seen that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen it as well. And so some people will branch off on their own, and that works great for them. You don't have a cushy base salary potentially, but you are able to then have the freedom to find your clients out there and provide them with the charter flights they need.
Absolutely. Now, I know a little bit about the industry, but I'm not like an expert or anything. Okay. So I'm super curious to know about this. Let's say you sell, 5 flights or something like that. How involved are you in that? Because at the end of the day, there's things that you can control and there's things that you can't.
Yeah.
Right? So, let's say the pilot ran out of duty. That happens all the time. Or the weather. Or they're going into Pewaukee in a specific type of aircraft and they can get in, but they can't get out because the runway is wet.
Yeah.
Right? So let's say you sell a flight. And so do you have to deal with a lot of these problems, and how do you solve them, or how do you go about solving those issues?
Yeah. So a lot of times the charter broker, it's not one of those set it and forget it kind of things, right? You sell the trip and then it goes on. You are still involved, getting the passenger information, all that jazz. And then you do have to, on the day of the trip, you're working hand in hand with the operator. If there's weather, like you said, a lot of times though, if there's a duty situation, you might be seeing it. It happens later in the day most of the time, right? So when we run into duty situations, we do have to be in contact with the client, let them know what's going on. Hopefully we can try and recover with another aircraft. Maybe that's on the same fleet as the operator that we're working with. If that's not a possibility, then we do have to source something else. And it depends on the operator. Some operators will say, oh yeah, we'll totally source another aircraft for you. Whether within fleet or outside of their fleet, or it's on the broker to source another aircraft. And sometimes that aircraft is not an upgrade and it's a downgrade, and it's whatever is available. But it depends. And the client, I will say, the client sometimes can be super angry, and sometimes it can be totally calm. I think it depends on the person. It also depends on the situation. If they're of an important business meeting, they might be
Gotcha.
up in arms, but
no, I mean, that sounds stressful, man.
I think there's so much stress that comes with that. And I think, when you sell those 5 flights, you really hope that all 5 are going to go off without a hitch, but this doesn't always happen.
Yeah. I mean, how often do you think it happens where everything goes smoothly?
This is difficult. I feel like I'm pulling a number out of thin air, but I'm going to guess maybe 80% of the time things go really well. The other thing too is, my advice for charter brokers that are out there when you're first starting out, track that tail that you've contracted 2 to 3 days out. If it's not moving, you might want to contact the operator, because it's a potential that you're going to run into a situation. I'm smiling right now, but I know the pains of a mechanical situation, and it's not fun.
No, for sure.
I've double mechanicaled before, and yeah.
So I'm
It's the worst.
I'm type rated in the citation 10.
Okay.
Okay. And from my experience, they always break down. Is that kind of like your
You know
experience?
what? We love the Citation 10.
Oh,
We do
really?
a lot of cross country trips with them. I'm name drop an operator that does great. Has Citation 10. Baker Aviation.
Baker, yeah.
they're
Rodeo.
fantastic. Yeah, they are really great to work with. So that's the Citation 10 company that we normally work with. I always think that it's the Hawker 1000s that break down, but maybe that was my COVID experience.
Oh,
I don't know.
see. Well, I mean, citation 10s do break down.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally think the citation 10 is more for like 91 operations.
Okay.
That's kind of like my personal opinion. I don't know if it's very well suited for like 135 where you're like running them all the freaking time.
Yeah.
So, question for you. For someone that wants to start as charter broker, do they need to get a license?
No license needed, no certification, nothing like that. Yeah, it's kind of wild. You'd think that you're handling some of the top money in the world as a charter broker and you don't need a certification. I mean, there are schools out there. Actually, you and I were joking about that, how a lot of people come to you thinking that you have a charter broker school.
Yeah.
And in fact, actually, so Monach Air Group runs their own charter broker school. And we teach people how to sell private jet charter and the differences in the sales cycle for fractional owning a jet versus also a jet card and then also just regular rental of their charter. But no license is required. So it does vary on the quality that you're going to get out.
Okay. So the Monarch Air Group, is this training for everyone or is only for the people that they hired to work for them?
So we do run a school outside of who we train internally. It's called the Monarch Air Group Private Jet Broker School. We do try to run it quarterly, and it's in person in Fort Lauderdale. And a lot of times people right now, what we'll do is it's a 2 days intensive. And then, if you wanted to apply that to your own business, you can, or if you are looking to get into chartering, that's a great way to get in.
So someone like, let's say, because when I started as an aircraft broker selling the entire airplane, I just want to like
make it clear.
make it clear. And I had this conversation with Tom Lelio, with the Private Jet Broker Association. So when he started, he was thinking about starting to work for someone, but I didn't even have that thought. I wanted to start my own thing. That's how I looked at it.
Yeah.
So this training would help for someone that wants to start their own business as a charter broker, correct?
Yeah, they could start their own business. We sometimes use it as a hiring tool as well. So if people happen to be in the South Florida area and they're looking to be a charter broker, we have hired a handful of people from the school because I think that's a great way for us. We get to see them ahead of time in the training, and it's a great way to bring them on. But if they are, I also had a handful of students in our last class who they had just started. I say students, they're real, they're adults. They've been in aviation for a long time. They actually were starting their own Part 135 operation, and they were just getting their certificate. So it was somebody who wanted to see more of the actual sales side. We had a pilot and an HR person that joined us, which was really awesome. So variety of different uses.
That is freaking cool.
Yeah.
And you teach this whole thing, correct? Or
I do. I teach the school. It's a great time. We have a variety of topics all about aviation, even just from the start and the get-go of, what is private aviation? What is a charter broker? What's an operator? All the differences, just so people can understand that and the different parts of aviation, because not everybody knows that either. And that's okay. I didn't know anything when I first started several years ago. So
yeah, no, that's awesome. Wow. So Noelle, I want you to talk to me about your first deal as a charter broker.
Yeah. Okay. So my first deal as a charter broker in the height of COVID. So a lot of times if you were flying someone in COVID and they were going to a different country, it required working with the Civil Aviation Authority. Long story short, the trip that I had was, I think it was Dulles to, I want to say Suriname, actually. And then, so it was DC to Suriname to like St. Kitts or something like that. So we had to work with both Civil Aviation Authorities. I was super excited. I think it was on a G4 SP. and it was 10 people. I went out to the plane to meet them all in DC when I was living there. And I was excited because you made money, you know?
I know.
And that was the thing. I closed a big deal. It wasn't necessarily a light jet or a turboprop or a piston. It was a big deal.
Yeah.
And then 2 months later, I actually went on to sell a really great trip from Minneapolis to Accra, Ghana, one way, $179,000. Now it'd probably be like 220, but I was very excited about that.
Wow. Like, okay, so you describe a couple emotions, you know, you're excited. Was there like, I don't know, were you nervous or like?
You're nervous? I think, okay, I was more nervous at that time in COVID that they were not going to be let out of the country again. Or there was always these weird regulations, right, with quarantine. So you didn't know if once they landed, they'd have to quarantine for like 5 days or something. That was more my worry than anything. I was also worried, like, what if the plane, you know, it's in South America, what if it breaks down? Or like Africa, what happens if, you know, people start to strip it, you know, like you see in movies? It didn't happen. It was fine.
Yeah.
But in your mind, you start going through all these emotions, like, I've just sent these people like across the world. Like, oh no.
Oh, so, okay. So you said like that trip to Ghana was like 170,000. That's a lot of money. How do you make money as a charter broker?
A lot of people want to know this question.
Yes,
yeah,
I know.
No, and it's a really good one. So as a charter broker, typically what'll happen is you will receive a quote from an operator. Let's say the trip for ease of use here is like 100,000. And it's domestic US. In the United States, typically they don't include federal excise tax, which is 7.5%. That's on all domestic within the 48 and then 225 mile zone in Mexico and Canada, if it's starting and ending there. And then from there, you're adding on your margin, if you will. That's your fee as a broker. Some brokers will add on 10%. Some will add on 15%. It just depends on who you're working for at the time. So let's say you're adding on 10,000 to your trip.
10%.
10%. Yep. Then if you're working for someone, you will make a percentage of that. If you work for yourself, you'll make 10,000.
And so if you work for someone else, what does that commission? So, you know, from this 100,000 example, you know, we make 10%, which is 10,000. How much of that 10,000 would you keep if you work for someone else?
Yeah, depending on the brokerage. And I've seen it a variety of ways, having worked at a couple different companies and just chatting with other people in the industry. You can make anywhere between 10 to 30% of that 10,000. So you could be anywhere maybe between that $1,000 to $3,000 mark. But again, you build your book. Let's say you have 2 clients per month doing 2 large trips like that.
Okay.
Add that up, plus like several other trips maybe that are smaller.
So I can see that this career can be like, you can make 6 figures plus.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so for instance, like if you work for someone, you know, how many, I guess some of it is, it's up to you, how good you are with sales and how you know, talk to clients and stuff like that. But how many flights can you close on average as a charter broker that works for someone else?
So it all depends on the brokerage, right?
Okay.
So some brokerages, you do a lot of outreach, a lot of cold calling. So if you don't have a lot of inbound leads, you might be closing less, not necessarily, but it's a lot harder to get more clients when you're just calling them and trying to get in touch with, you know, maybe a C-level. So maybe you're closing 3 or 4 deals per month. And then if those clients return to you, think about maybe having an additional 1 to 2 more clients per month. You build up your book at some point, maybe you're at 10 or 15. It's not unheard of at some places though, who have a lot of inbound leads. Some of the top people are closing 20 to 30 deals per month on a high end of 30. That's a deal per day. Now, again, some of these trips might be turboprop or piston, and they might be Bahamas to Florida, or even if you think about London to Paris, that's a short hop too.
Yeah, that is a short.
But you can make maybe $200-$300 on something like that.
Wait, so you can actually also sell charter flights in Europe?
Yeah.
So you're not limited to the US.
You're not, no matter where you are as a charter broker, you're not limited to where you are. So most of the time you'll hear people say, we can service on a global scale. That means you don't have to have great relationships with operators or client or, operators everywhere in the world, but you could easily do a trip. I had an inter-Saudi Arabia trip one time. It didn't end up going, but because you had to end up using, I think it was like one of the Prince's planes, but we could have easily done a trip like that. And yeah, we do trips in Europe all the time.
Wow, that is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I know like the US has specific regulations for charter brokers. I don't know which part it is. I know it's like in chapter 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, somewhere in there.
Yeah, it's somewhere in there.
But we did talk a little bit about this, how those regulations require you to disclose that you're not an operator, that you are a broker.
Yeah.
How does that work, like with regulations? Like if you're dealing with clients in other countries, I mean, is there any additional steps you have to take, or no?
We haven't run into any additional steps. The main thing that people will run into when working in Europe, especially, is GDPR with the data regulation piece and just making sure you're not selling their data kind of thing. But from like what we were talking about earlier with it's chapter 14, CFR. I don't know the actual number.
Part is.
Well, I do know that most of the time we will, at every place that I've worked at so far, when you're at the agreement stage or the contract stage, you're including what operator they're going to be on. By law, you do have to disclose as a charter broker who your client is going to fly with as the operator before the flight. So, and I think there's also one rule that says, you cannot advertise lower prices that don't include federal excise tax in the United States.
I see.
Yeah, there's been some news on that one recently, actually, but.
So you're saying advertise, right? Because you have to pay the 7.5%, no questions asked.
Yeah.
But you can't present it as we're selling you a charter flight for 30,000 or 100,000, right? Instead of like $107,500. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. So I almost think of it as like a bait and switch at that point, because you're not really legally allowed to do that, because it'll say, doesn't include taxes and fees. Well, now you're trying to get someone to sign, and then post-flight, they're coming back and saying, oh, you didn't show me all this. I would say that the truly legal way, you do have to disclose any taxes and fees and the all-in cost when you're presenting aircraft options.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Can you explain like how you get your clients as a charter broker? Let's say the charter brokerage doesn't have like ads and like a way to get inbound leads. Like how would you go about getting clients?
Yeah. So I would say there's several ways to go about it. One being networking events. The NBAA does have some great things here in the US where you can attend networking events and kind of get to know others in the aviation industry from finding your clients. So a lot of those might be you're searching for different titles. I always think that LinkedIn Sales Navigator is a great place to start. You're searching maybe for, let's say you're in Dallas, Texas, or even Chicago, and you're looking for titles like executive assistant or director of events, or even chief financial officer, chief executive officer. Maybe you're reaching out to those people on the phone or through email, but you're building your own sales cadence that says, maybe I'm triple tapping that first day. This goes more into sales methodology, but truly, you might be reaching out with a call, an email, maybe a LinkedIn message, trying to get a hold of them, see what they do from their private travel needs. And then following up, maybe it's a 21-day cadence that you've set up for yourself, or 14, just depending on who you're reaching out to.
If you don't mind me asking, like how would you start that conversation with them? Like, what do you usually tell them?
Well, it depends on who you're reaching out to. I think if you know that that they fly privately, maybe you found some information that looks like they do, or maybe they have different offices. I think if you see someone who has like 3 different offices or even 6 big offices internationally, that could always be a good indicator. Maybe they fly private. Not always, but you might call in. If it's an executive assistant, you might say, hey, I'm just reaching out from such and such company. I saw that you guys had all these different offices. Does Mr. Smith fly privately? Maybe he or she says, yeah, they do. We have a NetJets account. Okay, now you know. Maybe they're open for a conversation. You might be asking, it depends on the person, but you might say, oh, like, that's great. I'm so glad to hear that. If there's one thing that NetJets could do better, what would it be? She's like, oh, yeah. Mr. Smith is always complaining about
how things go. Yeah.
I'm not trying to put anything on NetJets. They're a fantastic company, but that might be the way that you're starting that conversation, and then hopefully having a longer conversation later. Yeah.
Apart from that, is there any other ways that you can reach out to, potential clients?
I think, I mean, there are some networking events that are some larger ones that, like Global Business Travel Association, GBTA, IMEX, which is also through SITE. So if you think about, people always think that it's the CEO that's traveling privately and whatnot, but a lot of times there's president's clubs that are traveling privately. So sometimes attending those events and even just Googling what might be happening in your area for those president's trips, those types of things, even board meetings, other people to reach out to. I tend to sometimes focus on, there's travel agents who might be a part of the Virtuoso network who have high-end clients that want to take family trips and things.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So as a charter broker, obviously you want them to, work with you and you provide them with the flights. But from the aircraft sales standpoint, usually if someone flies like less than 50 hours, it's recommended to just charter. If they're somewhere around, 100 to 150, maybe, a fractional or a jet card. And then 200 to 250, like you're probably looking at possibly buying, an airplane and maybe put it in a charter operator, and then you can offset some of your cost. Do you go through that like analysis with them, like trying to figure out what's the best fit for them? And if so, let's say like a jet card or a fractional is recommended for them. Can you make a commission? Like if you recommend them to, X company that has a fractional program, or they offer this specific jet card, can you make a commission from that?
That's actually a really good question. So we won't always follow the like 50, 100, 150. We sometimes do. If there's somebody who is at the point though where they just want full control of all of their flying, we always say, just buy the plane.
Okay.
Buy the plane, do all that. If it's somebody, because I know we have some clients who sometimes will fly 100, 150 hours per year. We don't do a ton of that analysis with them. We will sometimes start off with a client that comes in for just their one trip. If they do come to us though from like a family office, maybe they're looking for that analysis. Absolutely, as a charter broker, you should definitely understand what is out there in private aviation, not just charter, and also understand that they could go to fractional, or maybe that means that they're going for a jet card. I have yet to recommend somebody to another company and make a commission. I think a lot of people, we always joke that brokers get really sad when their client says, I'm thinking of buying an aircraft. They're like, I just worked so hard for that commission. You're leaving me.
Well, at the end of the day, my philosophy has always been try to identify a problem and offer a solution. Sometimes the solution may not benefit me, but at the end of the day, I look at it, I want to benefit them.
Oh yeah.
And that's how you create those relationships, and that's how people trust you, because they see you're being selfless. You're looking after them. I think that's a great opportunity maybe for charter brokers to also create relationships with aircraft brokers and, get a little cut in there for bringing clients,
And that's actually a lot of companies, I say a handful of companies in my previous company that I worked at, we had a branch of that company that oversaw aircraft transaction, which is great. So you did get a commission when they were interested. Cool. And we also multiple times as a charter broker, I've actually recommended a purchasing of an aircraft, and even a specific aircraft based on the missions that client had and how many hours they're flying. So that can sometimes be a part of those larger proposals for corporate clients that maybe have multiple NetJets accounts, or maybe they also own an aircraft or two. Just depends. But there
Gotcha.
are some of those larger proposals beyond just a trip by trip basis, which is pretty cool. So
Just a random thing
Yeah.
that came to my mind. Have you heard of Amalfi? I think it's Amalfi Jets or something. They're like pretty big in social media now.
yeah.
I see them all the time. I noticed that when they sell a flight, sometimes they will go in the plane. I mean, obviously, they're not an operator.
Yeah.
They're a broker. But they will go in the plane and they have like Amalfi pillows, Amalfi carpet. How does that? I mean, they're using like a different operator. So, like, how do they go about branding the airplane? Like,
So my
Can you talk
guess
to me
is
about that?
my guess is that let's say they maybe booked a flight, I don't know, out of Opelika in Miami, and maybe they're located in Opelika. They're going there. They put the pillows on board. They put out the carpet. The client boards the plane. They have that there, and then they're like, oh, take the pillows off. Or maybe where they're ever going.
Are you serious?
No, I don't know if they actually do that. Maybe once they get to that location, they have another person that's there. It could even be something where they have someone located in Miami and New York, and it's like this flight is going Miami to New York, and so they know they're going to get their pillows back.
Oh, I see. Okay.
That's my guess. I don't know. I don't know the inner workings of all that, but yes.
I
do
wonder
know.
if there's like any interference like with the law. I don't know, with the law, like in terms of like, because maybe that makes it seem like the airplane is like they're the operator.
Maybe.
I don't know.
It's interesting that you say that though, because that is, you sometimes worry as a broker that maybe like an operator will poach your client and just try and take them from you.
Shoot. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but I don't know. They must have some sort of thing with the operators that they're working with, or they have a preferred operator they like. And so they say, let's just take video of, these pillows this one time. Something.
Gotcha. So another thing that I noticed from Amalfi, and I think I've seen it in other ones, is they offer like a jet card.
Yeah.
But from my understanding about jet cards is the operator sells the jet cards, like 25 hours and whatever, like light, mid, super mid, whatever the case may be. As a broker, can you sell a jet card?
Yeah.
Like as your own?
Yeah, you can. So you can absolutely sell a jet card as your own. Basically, how that works is you don't own or operate those aircraft, right? But you are basically saying this is going to be your price per hour on a light, mid, maybe super mid, and you're putting a lot more restrictions on it. And maybe you're also saying, hey, we're going to do segment minimums. We'll definitely do daily minimums, but you might even put a segment minimum on board. So you might say, okay, if you're using a heavy aircraft that day, you might have a segment minimum of 2 hours and a daily minimum of 3 hours. So automatically, if the price for ease again is $10,000 per hour, which that's really low. If you were going to do a heavy aircraft for that, let's say it's $30,000, then you will then go out and source that trip for less than $30,000, and whatever you don't, let's say it's $20,000, you end up selling it for, or you buy it for, you make 10.
I see.
Sometimes though, it's a risky area, right? Because you could end up not making money, but you can absolutely have an escrow account and be a brokerage that has a jet card. You can even build a cap rate program if you wanted to with specific aircraft. There's a lot of fun things you can do.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So essentially the jet card is like, you buy, let's say 25 hours on a specific type of airplane, and the contract is usually for like a year, right? And then if you don't use the 25 hours in that year, you essentially lose the money. So that's kind of how it works, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So some will be a 12 month with expiration.
Okay.
Sometimes it's 24 months. It just depends on the company. But then they also will put in peak days, right? So you can't blackout dates, right?
Yeah.
They'll
Super
also
Bowl
maybe say, Super Bowl. They might even put in, you can't travel around Christmas. And then they might even say, hey, if you're going to be going down to the Caribbean or outside of the United States, it's going to be a 10 or 15% upcharge for that. So if you do buy in at a light, maybe they're upcharging you even more to go to a mid. Just depends. Yeah. So
do you know, because we're talking about brokers and we're talking about operators. Why would someone go and buy a jet card from a broker versus just going directly to the operator?
it's a good question. I would say if they already have the relationship with the broker, a lot of
It's
times,
relationships.
yeah, if you've built a relationship with a broker that you trust, that you like, that they get you the best aircraft for each of your missions. Maybe they're including catering. I don't know. Something like that. They might say, hey, for ease of use, that way you don't have to charge your card every single time. Why don't you wire over 100,000 and we can kind of do a jet card for you with a particular rate at each of these levels.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, so
You could.
so we talked about how to get clients. You mentioned networking events. You mentioned going to LinkedIn and reaching out to people that are high up in different companies, which I think is a great idea. Now, let's say someone kind of like agrees to work with you or have a conversation, and they're like, oh well, this Saturday I need a flight from Naples to New York. What's the next step? Like, as a broker, what do you do next?
Yeah. So first and foremost, we know where they're going. We want to know how many passengers are going. We want to know if they have any pets or anything like that. Maybe if they have any aircraft preferences. What we're going to do is we're going to source for aircraft. So because we're a broker, we don't own and operate. We're going to reach out to our contacts in the industry. Maybe we're texting a guy over at an operator that we really like. Or maybe we're going on Avinode and putting out a request on there. And then we're putting together those options for our client, maybe sending a text, depending on how you want to do it, text, email, call, let them know what options we have and say, let's log it in.
Okay.
Book that trip.
Do you have like a sheet of paper, like a cheat sheet or something with different questions that you should ask? Because, we got to know how many passengers, we got to know baggage, do they need catering, considerations with the airports, like we talked about, runway lanes. Is it going to be wet? Because if it's wet, then, we have the 60-80 rule for, and all these different things. Like there's like so many like moving parts into this whole thing. Do you have a checklist or like questions to ask?
Yeah. When people are first starting out as a charter broker, we definitely have a checklist for them. Don't forget the person's name. That actually happens more than you think because you get so caught up in where are they going, how many passengers, all that. But typical itinerary things. So if you were going to go online and book yourself a trip, maybe using Google Flights or like a Delta, American, whatever, they need to know where you're going and where you're coming from, the dates, how many passengers, and any special requests. They also ask for the special requests too, right? If you need like gluten-free meal, all that stuff. We don't always ask that right at the beginning, but we do have a checklist for them when they're first starting out. But after, week 3 or so, it starts to be just ingrained in memory.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and also like, I've noticed like going through LinkedIn and stuff like that, because obviously I follow a bunch of, aircraft brokers, charter brokers. Seems like a lot of the people are complaining about new charter brokers getting into the industry with no knowledge and like recommending people things, airplanes, and without really having the knowledge. Is that true? Have you experienced that, or what is your opinion about it?
I mean, I think it definitely happens. We sometimes will see people coming to us from maybe they've been burned by somebody who put them on an aircraft that they saw at such like a good price, and they thought, oh, wow, this is going to be so good. And they go on board and the interior's like 2,000 and, the leather is old and looking, right? Maybe they got burned in that regard. I think the biggest thing, if it's like advice for new charter brokers or people who are looking to get into the industry, really look and understand what aircraft can go, how far and how many passengers. I've even seen issues where people will recommend for a company to have, it was like a 9-seat plane. However, the 9th seat is a lav seat. And so someone's sitting in, it's a business meeting that they're going to. Someone is sitting on the toilet seat and they're flying private. For maybe $2,000 more, they could have put them in a slightly larger cabin, had 10 seats for everybody. So it does happen. And I think it's frustrating for sure. But I would say just understanding how many seats are on these planes. And something you and I had talked about also is luggage.
Yeah.
And I think it's true too. Like you probably see it on the broker side for aircraft. If you are recommending an aircraft that's really not right for the person's missions that they're about to do, you lose trust. It's not good. There's probably new aircraft brokers that are getting into it all the time, and it's like,
Yeah. And the reason why I was asking you about that checklist, I mean,
Yeah.
I have a checklist of a bunch of different questions that I ask to a potential aircraft buyer. Sometimes like the buyers know, just like in the charter side, right? Sometimes the client or the buyer in my case knows exactly what they want, but other times they just don't know, or they think this is a good fit. So I just sit down with them and I just go through this whole checklist. And one of the questions is, how much baggage do you plan to take? And maybe not every flight they're going to take, 400 pounds of baggage. But there's that, I always ask if there's like, what's the longest you're going to fly? And then how much baggage do you estimate to take in those long flights? Or even if it's once a year, I just want to make sure that that's taken into account when we select the airplane.
Oh, for sure. And that's the same, we were talking about baggage, something that sometimes comes up. I actually saw it. People will also bring oxygen concentrators on board. There's so many different things that are involved, and
wheelchairs too.
Yeah, wheelchairs.
Electric.
There are, and how big is the wheelchair? Actually, there is a really great company out there. I think it's Oak Air. They have a lift that brings you on your electric wheelchair all the way up to the cabin, which is amazing. And it is a little bit more pricey because they don't have that many of these aircraft. I think it's in a 604 actually. Don't quote me on that. But
a Challenger 604?
I think so.
Wow.
But, that's a great option and something that people have to keep into consideration. Are you going to put grandma on a piston aircraft? She's going to be...
No, she should not do that.
She can't do that. She can't get over the wing. So these are questions that you do want to ask her. Is the oxygen concentrator something that TSA has approved or that's approved? And then how many oxygen concentrators? I had someone who wanted to move 9 of them one time.
And then also like alcohol, like, you sure. So man, you just like, my wheels are turning, there's so many like details in this whole thing. So it's not just like, oh, I want to become a charter broker, I'm just going to sell this flight. No, there's like a lot into it.
And you start to know, as I'm sure you have, and you're selling aircraft, you start to see some of the pattern, but it's always different, right?
Yeah.
It's always different. And there's always something that comes up, whether it's like a de-icing charge or, you don't see that, but there's all of that. And it can be overwhelming, especially if you're working, 5, 6, 7 trips at a time, maybe for people. And then you really need to keep it all straight and who's going where and are the passports expired? Did they have a real ID?
Man, there's so much I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Oh, I got, okay, question here.
Yeah.
Clients that are going international, we have to fill out paperwork and inbound and outbound for TSA and whatnot. As the broker, do you handle that, or is the operator that needs to handle that side of things?
So as a broker, we will get the passports, we will get the passenger names and their weights, but beyond that, all of it is handled by the operator, which is great. So we don't do any of that, which is nice. Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm going to go back to, so we talked about how we get clients. You mentioned some of those. Then once someone agrees to work with you, we're going to start looking at what airplanes fit their mission. Once we know that, we're going to reach out to the charter operator via text if you have, if you already know them, or go into Avinode and see what options we have. Okay, so we found the option. What happens next? Do you send like a contract, like a quote in a contract, or just a quote, or what type of documents do you use in that stage?
Yeah, so this one also depends on the brokerage.
Okay.
Some people have a proposal that they've pre-made that works through their CRM and it's really beautiful. Some people will just send a link that takes them to an online proposal. Some people will just send an email with aircraft options. Most of the time, if it's an ASAP, a lot of times you might be texting the client and just saying, hey, I have this PC-12 at such and such price. Here's a photo. You want it or not? If it's a trip that's further out that maybe requires a little bit more consideration, or maybe it's higher price, that proposal will have all of the details for maybe 3 or 4 aircraft, year of manufacturer, year of refurb, who the manufacturer is, what type of aircraft it is, cabin height, width, length, any other amenities, Wi-Fi that might
Sure.
be on board, stuff like that. Maybe there's a cabin attendant, and then the price. And then you might have a conversation with the client that says, which one would you like to go with? It's a really dumbed down way of saying that right now. But, and then they say, yeah, I want to take the PC-12. Okay, great. Now we're sending an agreement.
Okay.
And we're reaching out to the operator once we actually have signed paperwork and money.
This agreement, that's something that the operator provides you with, right? Like the template.
We have our own agreement. So the client will sign the broker agreement. And then once our client has signed the broker agreement or our charter broker agreement, we will go to the operator once we have funds, maybe on a credit card hold or with a wire, and we will go back to the operator and sign their contract.
I see.
Yeah.
Their contract.
Their contract.
So
yeah.
they send you their contract for the broker.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
We won't have them sign directly with the operator. Otherwise,
Yeah, right.
they wouldn't need us.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Curiosity. The agreement that you send to the client, not the agreement that comes from the operator, the one that you send it to your client. What are some of the terms that show up in there?
Yeah. Most of the time, things that are in there, you've got cancellation terms, amendment terms. Most places are different. They'll hold you to a certain amount, maybe right after you've signed. But you really, at the end of the day, just need to be in line with what the operator contract has said. So some have stronger cancellation policies. Cancellation policies, you might have de-icing in there. You might have something about holidays and peak travel and not being able to cancel a certain amount of time for that. And you're disclosing what operator you're going to use
In that.
And then they sign price. And some are 2 to 3 pages long, I've seen, for broker agreements, and some are 7 pages.
Yeah, they're trying to cover their butt.
Exactly. It just depends on what your lawyer said, I guess, when you first made that agreement. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So probably for someone that wants to start their own charter brokerage, I guess a good idea is to go to a lawyer and an aviation lawyer and maybe help so they can help them like draft that broker agreement.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to go the cheap route, you could always pretend to be a private aviation client and call up a place and say, hey, I'd like to.
I love it. I freaking love it.
Say, hey, you know what? I actually have a trip going from Teterboro to Van Nuys and on this date and that date. And you're like, yep, I'm going with this option. They send you a contract. Do that at 5 or 6 different places. See what the contract looks like and make your own.
Let's go.
Yeah. Work smarter, not harder.
That's it.
Mind blown. Hey, you know what? It's the same though when you're buying an aircraft and you have your market analysis in front of you.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Let's go. Let's find it.
I love it. I love it. Okay. Shoot. You're letting them know like how to
I mean, see, the thing is that I'm letting you know that, but I didn't tell you what exact information you want to include from each one of those.
Yeah.
Because the worst is if you actually don't check it against, what you really need. 'Cause you probably should go to a lawyer. Maybe I should just say that.
No.
All my opinions are my own, by the way, not my company's.
No, and that's in my course, in the aircraft broker course, I have templates of the purchase agreement, LOIs, the certificate of acceptance or the technical acceptance letter.
Yeah,
they're just templates, and the thing with them is every transaction is different.
exactly.
So it's just a template to guide you, but you might have to like modify things like about the pre-purchase inspection or what happens after the pre-purchase inspection. So that's something that, it's up to them, my students to, figure out, but I do give them like a template.
Yeah.
Okay. So, they sign the broker agreement. You ask the broker or, you sign the agreement with the operator. How is money handled? Like from the client, where does that, like you said, escrow?
Yeah. So if you have a client maybe that is put money down with you.
Yeah.
But like if it's a first time client, a lot of times you will ask for a credit card hold. So they'll provide their credit card information on the agreement to the broker, and then your accounting team or yourself, if it's just a one-man show, you might be holding their credit card and then now signing with the operator so you don't lose the aircraft. Or you might, if you want to wait for the wire, you can, but you risk losing the aircraft. So a lot of people will do credit card hold, sign with the operator, and then you can have the client wire funds like 2 to 3 days ahead of the flight if you want.
Okay.
Yeah. It just depends. Again, if you also find, because there's scammers out there, and if you find that someone's kind of being wishy-washy, they don't want to talk about price, that's a serious thing to just be aware of if they're really, because it happens, right? So at that point, maybe you're just saying wire only and just be safe.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. And thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, be aware of what it could look like. And I think that's something you do realize after you have done several flights, what becomes a legitimate request versus something that really isn't a legitimate charter request. And then also where you can and cannot fly depending on what country you're from. If you are a US citizen, you cannot go to Cuba.
Right.
Unless if we have military clearance. Maybe not going to Venezuela, North Korea, Iran. These are places that you might get a call from and you can't go there. Haiti is another one, to Nicaragua. You can't do that.
Sure.
Flight, so
curiosity as well. In that quote that you sent to the client, is it itemized? Like, does it include, like, let's say the $100,000 quote from the operator plus the 7.5% plus your commission? Is it like breakdown like that, or it's just
all in pricing?
Okay.
Yeah, all in pricing. And some people, I've seen a few different brokerages out there that will do. They might show an itemized something, but they're not going to disclose their commission.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you run into like people that ask like,
oh yeah,
so how much are you making in this deal? Is that a typical thing? Or?
It's not. I would say it's not that typical. I think if someone is skeptical of why they need a charter broker, they might ask why. They're trying to be like justifying the cost. But at the end of the day, depending on what you do, you can tell them we make about 10 to 15%. And then leave it at that. Or you can even say we make a percentage based off of your flight, depending on where you're going, something like that.
Okay.
But, I think the one thing I also see is a lot of charter brokers when they're first starting out, they tend to get overwhelmed by the fact that these are big dollars. A charter that's $100,000 is maybe a lot of money to them. They're not just spending $100,000 to fly privately somewhere. And so having a client that's going to just drop that amount of money can be a big shock. And especially for something that isn't going to be there the next day. When they buy a plane, they get to use it.
Sure.
It's still more money, but at least that's there tomorrow, right? And behind, it's not like you're buying a house or a diamond ring. Charter is gone. You're just renting the plane. So what I see is with these charter brokers is sometimes when they get overwhelmed by that, they tend to spend with their own wallet, or they try to diminish how much they're making because they don't understand that their job is a good job. Like they are providing a value to the client and a service to the client. And sometimes they feel like, ooh, it's a dirty job, like I'm just a broker.
Yeah.
And you're not just a charter broker. I want to make that clear. You are a valid person. You are the person that's providing this person with aircraft solutions. And if they didn't have you, they'd have to make 50 calls to maybe 50 different operators just to find the price and the good aircraft that they want. So.
No, thanks for bringing that up, because I feel like as an aircraft broker, when I first started, I kind of felt like that too, like especially when I started. My first couple of commissions weren't that much. They were like 1,200, 2,000 here. It wasn't a lot of money. Oh, even though back then for me it was a lot of money.
For sure.
But then when I started, like, wow, 10,000, like I just felt like, oh, am I robbing him or something? Or 25,000.
Right.
But eventually you start to understand, like, that's my worth. I'm bringing a service here. I'm making your life easy, and that's what I charge. And there's nothing wrong with it, because I had deals where, I listed the airplane and I sold it like in 2 days.
That's amazing.
I mean, obviously I didn't make the 25 or 30,000 the second day.
Yeah.
We still got to do the pre-buy and stuff. That was like
Right.
signing the agreement, and and then all of a sudden, I get $25,000, and I'm like, but no, I mean
But you are providing such a good service to people, and that's the thing. Like I think people just get overwhelmed sometimes by the amount of money, and they're not used to seeing that, or they're not used to talking to somebody who's buying in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, or even just the tens of thousands of dollars to do this one simple trip. But sometimes these trips are hugely important to people. Maybe a loved one has passed.
Sure.
Maybe they have an important business meeting they have to get to because there's a massive merger and acquisition, and maybe they're going to lose that. It could be anything. Maybe someone got hurt and they need to get back to the States. Whatever it is, I always just say, know your worth and put the money on there, because you are providing a really good service. And if they want to come back and question that, that's a whole nother discussion, but that's okay.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks for bringing that up. All right. So we went over, we sourced the airplane, they signed the contract, you put a hold in their credit card or a wire, whatever you choose to do. When do you pay the operator? Like after the trip is completed?
So it depends on the operator, but most of the time you do need to pay in advance.
Like the full amount?
Full amount. Yeah. So, and the client is required to also pay full amount as well. Unless if it happens to be a really big incentive trip, let's say it's like $600,000 and you're on an airliner, like a VIP airliner, you might split up those payments based off of your operator contract. But most of the time you are paying your operator 2 to 3 days prior to the flight. And you want to make sure that the funds are there, because sometimes they don't move that plane. I ran into actually a funny one where it was at Minneapolis to Accra.
Okay.
And we were using a new operator located in Turkey, and we had never used them before. They happened to be in Chicago or in Teterboro, and they were going to go back to Turkey, but
empty.
But they weren't going to go empty because we were bringing the plane to Ghana. At the end of the day, we almost didn't take off because they didn't have funds, and they delayed the trip by about 2 hours because they were waiting for us to pay the operator. Like the plane was in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
I was in Minneapolis with the clients, and you're like, pay them. But it was,
oh shoot.
Yeah. So sometimes the trip will not happen unless you pay your operator.
Yeah.
So
okay. That makes sense.
Unless you know them really, really well and they know you're good for the money, but in this case, it was a new operator for us. So.
All right. So, like, the trip happens, and I guess, well, no, because I guess this is in the contract, but like, what happens, like, because maybe there's additional charges in this whole thing, like DIs or limo service or catering.
Yeah.
But that's already handled from the very beginning, right?
It depends. Some brokers will include maybe like $100 or a few $100 worth of catering within the price, their all-inclusive price, or that they want to share. Sometimes they'll pass that on to the client. So if they do want catering, they might say ahead of time, back and forth on email. It's de-icing is really where you have to be careful.
I've seen $30,000 de-ice bill.
That's insane. I know that.
Have you ever seen that?
I haven't seen that, but I've seen one where the price of the charter was the same price as the de-icing. It was like a $12,000 charter, something, super short hop and everything. Sure. It's mind-blowing. Wow. Mind-blowing. What are they? They must have like liquid gold I know that it's not liquid gold. I know all about what they spray on the planes, but.
Type 1, type 4.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like gold that they're spraying out there.
Shoot. Okay.
I mean, it makes us safe, so I get that. But the thing I think people sometimes don't realize on that de-icing charge when it happens is, we're going back to the client, and it's just best if you have an inkling that there might be a de-icing charge. You might want to have a conversation ahead of time and just CYA and say, hey, this trip is going to be going from New York to Iowa or wherever. We might be incurring a de-icing charge. I just want to let you know that in advance. And this is ahead of the trip. And they're like, okay, no problem. If they're new to private aviation, they're like, oh, how much is that? Again, it depends on the class of aircraft, right? If you're in turbo, it's totally different than an ultra long range. But.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. For someone brand new, has no experience in aviation, they like airplanes, they like aviation, they want to get into the industry, what type of skills and knowledge do you recommend them to acquire?
Yeah. I will say, first and foremost, I see a lot of people become a charter broker if they've been maybe in the business travel side of things. I've seen some people who they need to have customer service skills. So maybe they're on the business travel side, or maybe they're working at an FBO, and then they go to become a charter broker because they have knowledge then of what goes on the ramp, who's checking in for these flights, things like that, which is a great transition. So if you can get yourself into something like that, maybe at like an Amex GBT or even a corporate travel company, those can be great. I've also seen pilots make the transition, but the main 3 skills that I say would set people apart. I guess curiosity is not a skill, but curiosity is really important. Customer service skills are seriously important. And then the last one I would say is determination. You do need to be determined to do it, and you need to follow up with your client and be there for them no matter what time of day. Thanksgiving Eve, 9 p.m., client needs something, you are there for them because this is the world that they are a part of. And if you do not provide that service, they can easily go find another charter broker.
Shoot. So if you're working for a brokerage,
mm-hmm.
Are you expected to be like available 24/7, 365?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when you're on vacation, if your client is emailing you, you still need to respond to your client because that's the service that they're expecting.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It means you have to start your own brokerage.
No, but even then, your clients are the people that you would have. So they're definitely they're not going to be like, oh, he's just enjoying his Mai Tai by the pool. No, you need to respond.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, no, I could sit here and talk to you for another hour.
Same. This has been great.
But I think we have to wrap it up here. Is there any final things you want to share? Maybe some advice to someone new that's starting to or thinking on starting in this industry?
Yeah, it's never too late to start to be in aviation. I say, find the knowledge, reach out to people, even if it's starting a job at a FBO or even an operator. Maybe it's even just doing the customer service side of things or even scheduling. You can always transition to sales. Don't be afraid to go out there and get it because they can always say no. And you can get up another time and you can get the yes, the fifth or third, 100th time, whatever it might be. Go get them.
Let's go.
Let's go.
I love it. All right, guys. Well, thanks for watching. And if, this conversation was mainly about becoming a charter broker, but if for whatever reason you're also interested in becoming an aircraft broker, and I'm going to specify where you sell, help aircraft buyers and sellers either sell the entire airplane or buy an airplane. I have a full course where I teach people how to do that. And I teach them how to start their own aircraft brokerage. But apart from that, we'll see you in the next episode. Take care.
Right.
Dang, that was good.
Yeah, was it?